Hello, good evening, and thank you for joining us for our latest Dengie webinar. Welcome back if you are a regular, and I know many of you do attend every one of our webinars, and a very warm welcome if this is the first one you've joined us for. I'm Dr. Katie Williams, the Technical and Product Development Manager here at Dengie, and I'm delighted to bring together some fabulous guests tonight. Before I introduce them, just the sort of housekeeping, we are recording the webinar, so it will be available on the Dengie YouTube channel in the coming days after tonight, and there are lots of other recordings there, so please do take a look and check them out. To help the quality of the recordings, we do have audience mics and cameras off, so please put any questions in the chat or the Q&A boxes. My colleagues Tracy Hammond and Katie Reeve are there, so they will be answering any questions you have behind the scenes, so thank you to them. And if time, we'll have some questions at the end. Our guest speakers may well reply as well when I'm doing my little bit at the end, but just to remind you that basically we are sort of live, so we will try and get to them. If we don't this evening, then we'll follow up in the coming days. And so on to our speakers this evening. So we have Sandie Robertson and Charlie Hutton, who are a husband and wife team, albeit in separate locations this evening. Sandie is an elite equestrian mindset coach with a background in mental and physical health. She helps to unlock issues, trying to get rid of anxieties, boost self-esteem even, and manage confidence with her clients so they can get back to doing the things they love to do. Charlie is a dressage rider and coach and is in high demand around the world, coaching at more than 20 venues, including the USA and Asia. He's also had a very successful international career, winning internationally and with six national titles too. And Lucy Jackson, last but by no means least, I think we can call you a regular to our webinars. Lucy's competed at the 5-star level eventing, teaches, also now focuses on working with racehorses, helping to school and train them as part of their race training. And I think, Lucy, you've worked with various psychology coaches as well during your career. So I think you're going to share some of your experiences with that this evening as well. So we're actually going to start with Lucy. She's going to set the scene for us from a rider's perspective, and then we'll move on to Sandie and we'll have a sort of discussion between the 3 guest speakers, and then I'll round off the evening with some nutrition content. So I'm going to share the screen for Lucy, and I'm be the operator, so you can blame me if it goes horribly wrong. Right. Screen 1. Sure. Let's see if I can get rid of. Are you seeing it full screen, or are you getting the present?
I am seeing it full screen, yeah.
Right, brilliant. I will go to the next slide.
That's it.
Here you go. Over to you.
So I'm just going to move myself out of the picture. Good evening, everyone. Thanks very much for having us. Thank you, Dengie, for organising it. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I think confidence is one of those elusive things that we feel like if we could bottle it, we'd be absolutely loaded and nail every show, nail every day's training. And I chose this sort of title picture because I think it, for me, exemplifies what I think I was trying to achieve in riding with confidence. I've got an enormous smile. The horse has just done a really good spin through a difficult combination at advanced level, and feel like we're, you know, in harmony and hopefully ticking quite a few boxes as we go along. So yeah, it's hard to put into words exactly what that confidence is, but hopefully a picture there sums it up sort of in my head. So let's go on to the next one and see what I feel like makes up how you can ride with confidence. So I felt like control the controllable. There's only so many things you've got to say over in your day at home, in your training session, in your day at the competition. So identify the things that you can change and try not to worry about the things that you can't change. So you can change your kit, your packing list, make sure you're organised, the layout of all your kit at home, you know where everything is, you can pick things up, put things down, have it clean, tidy, safe, out of the way. And similarly at a show, this particular day was quite a fun one. We actually had I was riding 7 horses in one day, which is unaffiliated. So we didn't need to be quite organised. I think we were all done by about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So that's, my maths isn't very good, but 7 dressage tests, 7 rounds of show jumps, and 7 rounds across country, so we needed to know which bridle was where, which number was there. And I didn't have I have a lorry without living, so it was all did have to be outside, so I thought that was quite nice. And I think for me that helps you ride with confidence, because if you know your girth's done up, your bridle's going to stay on, you've got the bit in that you wanted to and that you've practiced in, it gives you a sense of being a little bit in control and knowing that as much as you can, you've got where you need to get to, wearing the right kit and the right clothes, hopefully. And that's a sort of start in feeling confident about your day. So that was for that section. And then moving on to the next one. Again,
the whiteboard looks like a great idea, actually.
Yeah. So again, with organisation and planning, controlling the controllable, I feel like it helps you be confident. It helps you ride with confidence if you've got an idea of what events you're targeting. You can then work back from those as to what lessons you might need in which phase. The ones you feel like you're struggling with or your horse is struggling with, or you've had a confidence blip in, you can target more clearly. You've got a program for fitness, and I jokingly say, but you and your horse, I was never very good at doing my own personal fitness, but put huge amounts of time and effort into both my horse's nutrition, thanks to Dengie, and my horse's fitness. And this was a rather lovely picture here of Willie doing his retirement, aged about 22 by that stage. And I think box ticked, you know, he felt great, he looked great. And if you can set off to shows with the horses in their peak condition, I feel like that really helps your confidence in thinking that the day is going to go as well as you could have hoped. Similarly, animal health includes such a wealth of professionals. Knowing in your head that you've ticked those boxes feels very reassuring. And I suppose even getting in the lorry to go to the event, deciding whether you're going to upgrade a horse or going to a new coach or going to a new venue, all these things feel like if you've ticked the boxes and you know that there's no stone left unturned, you're not going to come away at the end of the day and thought, well, if only I'd done X, Y, or Z. That helps your confidence. So the vet, the farrier, the physio, the nutritionists, that's both you and the horse, the saddler. Downtime I'll come on to later, because I've added a slide that isn't on here that I'll just say that sort of winds it up at the end. So yeah, again, control the controllable, know what you're aiming for, know how you're going to get there. And I'm not saying those plans always, especially with horses, stay as you set them out to be. You might need to adjust, you might need to focus on one phase, you might need to have a bit of time out for an injury for you or the horse, but you can still go back and tick those boxes, reference your new target. So that's that slide. For me, when I was very busy, I ended up with about 20 horses under my care, and trying to have a routine that I knew suited not only me, but the horses, the staff, the owners knew where we were at, those other professionals we've mentioned, and being organised with a daily plan. And then here you can see there's a bit of a weekly plan for what each horse is going to do. And again, it's in whiteboard pen, so you can rub it off and start again when the inevitable blip happens. But having a vague idea of what you're targeting, how their programme is going, what needs adjusting, what needs sticking to. And that's both in terms of whether you're aiming for a training show, a big show, a fitness prep, whether you've got a vet coming and they'll need an easy day. Trying to keep some sort of a routine was good for everybody's headspace, in my opinion. I think that helped us all. The horses knew where they stood, the girls knew where they stood. Everyone had an idea of a bit of a structure, and I feel like for my confidence and their confidence, that was a big plus. So on to the next slide. The team members and their roles. There's so many, you know, horses is quite a unique sport, no matter which discipline. I think it does take a village. And I heard a brilliant quote, and it said, you can aspire alone, but it takes a team to achieve. And that was actually rowing, Steve Redgrave, but I think it applies hugely in the horse world. And if you know that your team members are pulling in the same direction, it really helps your confidence. You really feel the benefit of their energy and their drive and their focus, and having, again, caution, not having too many people particularly involved when you're at the big shows that really matter. You've got to have your clear thinking space, you've got to have your clear plan. You don't want a million different opinions, but the tight-knit crew that's become your family, that are grooms, owners, parents, you know, the animal health team, coaches, that there's such a wealth, and you'll know, especially the more you do it, who suits you and who doesn't, and you can very diplomatically manage that accordingly. There are some people you'll find that actually, mothers particularly, sometimes need to be able to step back and give you that space because they're so anxious, but then join in, you know, the other roles of the care of the horse afterwards and things like that. So again, your confidence can be very affected in a positive way or a negative way by who you're surrounded by at home and at the show. So on to the next slide. So I was lucky enough to work with Claire Norman, I still do actually, and that was for about 15 years, who I started with as a sports psych, and she's also a business coach. She's also a really thoroughly lovely person with a very level head. So she was really good to bounce business ideas that you're trying to balance against competitive goals, against, you know, family pressures. It's hard to take you as an athlete in isolation because there's so much more to life going on. And we do a lot of visualization. The Le Lion moment is something that she got me to work with on very early, and picture a moment that I had really felt on top of my game, where the day was going really well and it felt as though it was unlikely or less likely to go wrong. And I was 3/4 of a way around Le Lion d'Angers, which is the World Young Horse Championships. I had about 5 fences to go. And I'm not saying it was definitely get nailed on that you're going to go clear, but you felt really confident. On it would be disappointing in the extreme if something had gone wrong at that stage, and then you practice thinking about the smells, the sights, the sounds that were associated with that feeling, and then you can almost get your body attuned to practicing those, which is something I'd love to go on about, but I'll stop now. So that when you feel the butterflies, or you feel yourself being distracted about to go into the start box, you can almost say to yourself, Le Lion, and then you take yourself to this moment where it couldn't go wrong, where actually in the start box there's quite a lot at that stage that you feel that might or not. As well, I like to, if I learn a dressage test the night before, I can put the horse's ears in front of me, visualize the arena, ride through the test. Similarly, show jumping, you can walk it once or twice on foot, and then at least 5 or 6 times in your head. If something goes wrong when you're visualizing, I tend to try and cross that out in my head and then ride it again. And it's almost free practice. It sounds quite funny, but you get to ride. The professionals that are riding 5 or 6 horses a day, every day, are 5 or 6 times more practiced. So if we haven't got 5 or 6 horses, we might need to practice more in our head, and we can't ride as many times as them. And similarly for the cross country. And at a 3-day event, you spend the whole week visualizing how the cross country is going to go, and hope that that is able to be put into practice. So that's a little touch on visualization. I'm sure Sandie and the others will have a lot to say about that. But for me, that was the most sports psych addition to the other practical steps for making riding with confidence possible. So the next one. Oh, I think this is quite a funny one. I'm not sure I've done too much reading on this, but I feel like personally, you can have a big impact on your horse and your performance and your confidence. Not only the horses, but the people around you, by how you act. And so knowing that if your heart's racing and your voice gets squeaky and loud, or you get a bit erratic, that actually the wheels can fly off on the back of that. So if, again, it's controlling the controllable. I can't change what other people are going to do. I can have an influence on what the horse is going to do, but I can change myself. So taking the time to take a deep breath and not fly off the handle, taking the time to speak quietly and slowly, act really kindly, being very methodical in how you work through something, I think helps everybody within the team to achieve a confident ride, a confident day, a confident session. So I felt personally that I find those things come into my conscious and therefore were worth mentioning in terms of riding with confidence. So the next one, oh, this is when it doesn't always go to plan. I had quite a bad fall about Evie. My daughter was about 12 weeks old, and this little horse was really sharp, and we made a bit of a mistake, and actually then he wasn't able to be caught for about 5 minutes galloping around the show. And you just think, and then this at the top right is there, my other half, and you can see someone else is falling off and sort of adopting the brace position. Dust yourself off, pick yourself up, and how to adjust your goals and think, right, well, I'm clearly going to need to do quite a lot. This was me falling in the water, quite a lot of water practice. Let's step down from the advanced level that he was at and go and practice at home, and then practice at the novice level, and then upgrade him again. And actually he went on to be very successful 4-star with me, and then was sold to be very successful 5-star. So it is disappointing, and it does affect your confidence, even if you don't want it to. And so again, it's putting in place these practical steps that can get your confidence and the horse's confidence back, in my opinion. And so the last, I haven't put another slide on, but that led me to say that I think perspective is much easier with age and having some sort of a balance in your life, so that you don't make it all consuming. These muck-ups are bound to happen on a greater or lesser scale. Hopefully they're not all as serious as that one. But I think as you go on through the levels, or as you go on towards your goals, and the inevitable ups and downs happen, if you can say, well, damn it, just wasn't meant to be today. You'll go to the pub and drink 5 pints of lager, and I'll feel awful in the morning, and then I will take a deep breath and then work out how best to set about going back to achieving that original goal, even if it's in a month's time or 6 months' time. So I think, in a way, riding with confidence is to do with having other ways of unwinding. You might go for a run, you might go for a swim. It doesn't just have to be beer. So that you've got a chance to be realistic about the fact that it is our passion, and we really want to be brilliant at it. But we did, with all things being well, got back in the lorry, and I had 2 legs, 2 arms, and my horse had 4 legs, and worse things can happen. So I'm not saying that it belittles what you're trying to achieve, but I'm just trying to say, if you put it in some sort of a perspective, and then you can crack on and give it your best the next attempt. That is my riding with confidence. Those are my riding with confidence thoughts, and look forward to hearing about everyone else's.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Sandie, I think, do you want to come in and just build on, from your perspective as a coach working with elite riders, and build on what some of Lucy's talked about? And Charlie, feel free to chip in as well. I've got some questions, but I think you might want to put some thoughts forward first.
Thank you for that, Lucy. I was just enjoying listening to you, and part of the thing I hate most about my job is when I see pictures of people falling. I spend all my time talking about not dwelling on the negatives and not putting it back in your mind, and then you see these pictures and you're like, God, don't do it to yourself. Stop doing it to yourself. Why do any of us ride horses when we see images like that? So there was quite a lot of what you said there, which I absolutely agree with. And rather than me babbling on about who I work with, I thought I could just jump straight in with some of the points. And I'll go with one of the last ones first, which was visualization, which is such an amazing, incredibly powerful skill to have when we can use it for ourselves in a positive way, and one of the most deadly weapons when we use it against ourselves. And unfortunately, the human brain is attracted to trauma, so it's very easy to construct horrific, dramatic images about everything and manage to embellish them and elaborate them so every worst case scenario can ever happen. But without getting too technical at this time of an evening, I think it's really important, and Lucy touched on this as well with conscious thought, to remember there are 2 parts of our mind. So we have conscious part of our mind, which does logic, and it does timekeeping and reason. And then we have the subconscious part of our mind, which believes everything we put into it. and in theory believes everything that our eyes see, but our thoughts become part of that. So if we're looking at pictures of us having rotational falls, or if our visualization's going wrongly and we're not as practiced as Lucy is, where she can absolutely correctly think, delete that, start again, it's no wonder that when we're spending, and for a lot of riders, it becomes a full-time job imagining everything that's going wrongly. And we don't even realize we do it. We think about it at work. We think about it on the way to the barn. We think about it in the tack shop. We think about it when we're putting our boots or our hat on. And if we're spending all of that time putting that image of, for me, it used to just, I had an accident where I broke my back. And after that, for me, it was my visualization became whenever I stood off, because I was a fan of going long, fast and long, still am, but whenever I stood too far off, that's what I would rehearse. So naturally, when you tack up and you come to the arena and you have all these horrible feelings, it's because that part of your mind is saying, holy crap, I remember what happened here, even if you've never been there, because we've rehearsed it, we've trained it to feel that way. So being precise with your visualization is so key, and it's not easy. It's not easy in today's instant society where our attention is, I think, probably sadly 3 seconds at the moment, to be able to make yourself be that disciplined. And it's really important to build that resilience. So well done with that, Lucy. Another thing I would add is you're obviously great at visualization, but if you think, as human beings, we all have 5 senses. So we have visualization, we have sight, we have taste, we have touch, see, and smell. Is that my 5? And everybody is made up with different submodalities. So, and Charlie, this is one, we talk about, it's really key as coaches that we try and understand, and key as riders to understand how you learn and how you hear and how you see the world. And I was thinking, if I had one gift, it would be to be able to, for example, see through your eyes, because we all see it differently, we all hear it differently, and we all notice different things. So for a coach teaching someone who wasn't visual and you're telling them to see their stride, that means nothing to them. That's where the frustration comes in. But if they learn the world through sound and you tell them to listen to the rhythm or hear the footfall or listen to your breathing, then that makes sense to them. Or, for very kinesthetic people, I'm very emotional and navigate through feel. So for me, it's about, talking about how things feel rather than what I could see or what they sound like. So learning that about yourself is a really, really useful tool. And for coaches, being able to adapt that to your clientele is, I think, the thing that really gives you that that proper connection, that real understanding. When when we all have the coaches where you feel safe, or you think they get me, like they understand that. And then when we are nervous, or when you're thinking of a strategy, which I'll jump onto in a moment, if you can think of your 3 things that become important. So whether that is listening to the horse's hoofs, listening to breath, and listening to your own breath. If you're auditory, you manage to find your own strategy that works for you, rather than hearing all the things that we're meant to do, trying to implement someone else's, and it's just not working, which makes you feel even less confident, because you think, God, I can't even do that properly. Does that make sense?
Can I ask a question? Do people know which sense they are most sensitive in and how it might help? Or do you think, well, they didn't really get it by trying to look, so let's try something else? How do you know?
So generally, we don't know. Generally, unless creative and artistic people tend to know, because you're quite in tune with yourself, or people who do meditation or that sort of thing probably work it out. But it's doing really simple exercises like a closed eye visualization, and starting it really simply, like, can you see your front door? Can you see your horse? And for some people, it'll be yes or no. And then you can ask questions like, is it in black and white? Is it color? Is it a video? Is it fast or slow? And that would gauge how much of a sense someone is. So I have almost like a photographic memory for anything I've seen, but I can't create an image that I haven't seen, if that makes sense. And then, so people might be like, yes, I see it, or no, I don't see it. And then you'd be like, okay, can you think of your horse, and can you imagine how they feel? Can you feel your hands on the rein? Can you feel their rugs when you're buckling it up? And then, you know, can you smell the amazing Dengie Alpha A in the stable or a fibre mate? Can you smell the polos at the show? Or, you know, can you remember how it felt? Sorry, I've got a question. Can you remember how it felt? So just doing like closed eye exercises like that is really simple for people to be able to like, oh, actually this works for me. So can you remember the music? Can you remember what someone said to you? Can you remember the noise beside the arena?
And it's quite a fundamental thing, isn't it? We find, and you're commenting about feed and that, but you find that people come in and instinctively want to smell. If they're on a show stand, they pick up things, they touch, they smell.
Yeah.
Some people obviously smell, and some people touch it and feel it, and it's very I suppose fundamental to how we sense and decide whether we want to do something or use something. And I guess horses, there are a lot of evocative smells associated with them, some less pleasant than others, but
Yeah.
it's really interesting, isn't it, to kind of how that then builds your perception of how you're going to perform and how you're feeling.
Yeah, and especially for dressage, I struggled to remember a course. So for dressage test, but it always amazes me how differently people have to learn a test, you know, and whether that's you know, whether they can see it or whether they have to talk themselves through it or whether they draw it out. If they have to feel it, then drawing it out is a really good way of doing it. So they're, you know, learning, because so many people think they're failing at things, and it's just because they just don't know how to do it for them correctly a lot of the time. You know, so I think understanding yourself is really sense. And then something else, as Lucy was talking about confidence and that beautiful picture of you riding, something I heard the other day, and it said, you know, confidence is calm, but ego makes a lot of noise. I think we misunderstand the word ego with being egotistical or thinking too much of ourselves, but our ego mostly is there to protect us. So if your ego is shouting at you, you know, listening to what we're saying to ourselves is usually what your fears are. You know, so if there's, you know, that beautiful moment when you're calm and you're confident, you're not really thinking anything, you're just being and you're loving it, and it's the whole reason we all do it. But your ego is your safety net. Your ego's the devil, but he's there trying to tell you that he actually wants you to be safe. He's just going to make a whole load of reasons that you shouldn't do things. But understanding why you're telling yourself that is much easier to silence it. It's a bit complex.
How do you, because there's a difference, isn't there, in terms of the pressure that you're applying to yourself to perform well, and then fear for your safety, and you know, is it different? Do you coach people differently to deal with those different things? Because I imagine they're very different.
Very different.
Pushing on elite riders in particular.
Very different. And I think the problem, and certainly something I've had to adapt to as a coach, when ultimately horses are, it's a dangerous sport, isn't it? Ultimately. So most of the time, what we are battling, you know, clients will come to me and say, I've got this irrational fear. And I'm like, you don't have an irrational fear. You have a very rational fear, especially if you've been hurt or, you know, there's a real danger of you getting hurt. So what we have to do is to be able to override our body trying to do what it's meant to do to keep us safe. And, you know, I think we're all a little bit crazy when it comes to horses, because you think, you know, if you had a car crash and you said someday I was feeling a bit nervous about driving, you'd be like, God, of course, I'll drive you. You know, with horses, we're like, come up, back on, you know, just get back on, dust yourself down, don't
mind your broken arm, carry on.
Never mind, you're fine. But like Lucy said, you know, we spend all our time rehabbing our horses and making sure they're okay. And I do think it's okay when, so coming from the confidence perspective, you know, if you've had, again, like Lucy said, stepping things back, if things aren't going well, the most sensible thing in the world is to address that, go back down a little bit, work in what's broken until you get to the point where you're like, God, if I ever have to jump another 90, or if I ever have to do another 1-star, or if I ever have to do a medium again, I'm going to kill myself. I want to do this next bit, rather than standing there shaking in your shiny boots thinking, oh my God, I feel sick. I know I'm not ready for the next step. You know, and I think, so to go back to your question with elite riders, you know, every level of rider has the same doubt. It's a different badge, but the problems are always the same, regardless of the height or level or Charlie's bands that you compete at. But I think what works to help with that is, so what I would say is number one is having a strategy. So, you know, it's impossible to compete at the most elite level without a plan of how that's going to work. And it takes a long time to get there. And I think people can be really unrealistic about the time frame that takes and how negotiable you have to be able to be on that time frame, because every horse is different, every rider is different. The commitment that it takes is something that a lot of people underestimate as well. It's, you know, it's massive, because you have to commit to your strategy, you have to commit to your time, you have to have a team around you making that same commitment, that are able to make that same commitment at the same time, that can fall in with your strategy. And then unfortunately, the number 4, which definitely when it comes to horses, is no matter what we do on our best day or our worst day, there's such a huge element of luck. You know, so resilience comes into that, because we can be $1 million rider one day and your horse is just not, or it pulls the shoe, or gets cast, or the lorry won't start, or all of these things. Or likewise, your horse can be in the best day and female riders can be a hormonal mess, or you haven't slept because your daughter has been up all night, or you've had to work a double shift at work, or you've just had a domestic with your partner. And all of these things are contributing factors. So I think when you're performing towards that, you've got to know your why. You've got to know what it is that makes you want to do it, what it is that allows you to do it. And then in your strategy, being able to create that space where you know where you can put yourself into that state to be able to do it. And I think I could speak about this for hours, but I'll just say one more sentence and let you ask some questions. And I think one of the easiest ways to do that is to find out your non-negotiables. You know, so to be able, for everyone, like you said, you know, horses can't be everything. People want to assassinate me when I say that when we work one-on-one. They're like, what do you mean they're my world? And that's the most dangerous place, because when your emotional investment is a 10, when your financial investment's a 10, the sacrifices you make are a 50, it's very hard to get your rewards to match. You know, so we have to find out what our non-negotiables are, you know, whether it's, you know, I know one very successful rider who, regardless of what she achieves on a Sunday, she will leave a jump off, leave an international show to go home. She will always have dinner with her family on a Sunday night. That's her non-negotiable. Whether it's the fact that you'll only ride 6 days a week, and you'll make sure you have time to see your partner once a year in our case, or whatever it is, but being able to create I will do all of this stuff, but my one non-negotiable is, because there has to be life on the other side of it. You want me to keep, I feel like there's loads of questions popping up.
Yeah, I think well, we can certainly get some. I think some of the ones were sort of related, in the sense that, is there anything you can do in the moment when you're really nervous to help calm yourself, which probably relates to the other question for Lucy, when you've been competing at high profile events like badminton in the start box and things, you know, very much in the moment at that time, with all the pressures coming to a head. What's your advice there?
I want to hear Sandie answer that, because
the
in the moment thing. But I can do the start box at badminton. I think the year I had my best badminton, everyone else was having an absolute nightmare of a day. It was really, really rainy, and I think it ended up being 36% completions. And my darling dad said to me on the way to the start box, "You don't have to." It was really sweet, but it was I was really, really relative. Obviously I had butterflies. Clearly I had butterflies. There was some pretty, you know, dramatic day, but it goes back to what I said in my little talk earlier. It's like all my boxes were ticked. The horse was fit enough. I was as ready as I could be, had the right kit on, I was there on time. And so for me, I don't know what sort of thinker that makes me, but for me, I was never going to be more ready than I was right that second. So I was still nervous. I still was desperate to do a good job at that stage in my life. I didn't have any fear of being physically hurt despite my falls. But I really, really didn't want to let the horse down. I really, really didn't want to let the owners down. I really wanted to get selected to go to the Olympics. Those were my things that created anxiety or ate away at my confidence. But you know, I'd had a great spring. So yes, I was nervous, but for me, knowing if I've ticked my boxes, now I don't know, be really interesting to get Sandie's view on in the moment when I do get really nervous. If I haven't ticked a box, then what? Go on, Sandie.
Should you go?
So I think the key thing that is in the moment, when we're in the moment and the nerves have taken over, then that's the most difficult state. So when I talk about state, I talk about like our performance state or our mental state. So being able to create your strategy so that that doesn't happen. You know, so if you think when you're training a horse, you can't train a horse in fight or flight. You know, we do everything to try and stop these states arising. But when you're in that place, the best thing you can do, and I did it instantly when you spoke about it, is to take a breath. Because when we're breathing, when you're sitting there and everything's trembling and you're breathing in that shallow breath, that is our fight or flight breath. So we're actually not designed to be able to think in that space. So you think back to the days when Navajo Indian, I don't know why I always tell this story, when Navajo Indians were chasing buffaloes off a cliff, they were not designed to risk assess. They're just designed to fight, flight, or freeze. So when we're breathing like that, that's all we can do. So the instant thing is to be like, okay, get my breath beneath my sports bra line, and then you can start to actually clearly think. And then when you're in that space, when you can clearly think, then you start to do your sort of 3 thoughts or your you know, strategy, or like Lucy says, have I done this? Have I done that? Yes, we're okay. A mantra is another really good one, having 3 words that you say to yourself. So for me, it was just do it, which I know is a bit Nike, but it was like, just do it, just do it, just do it. And I would do that from my first canter stride. So take a breath, have your strategy, and I wrote something else about that. And also having different associations with your feelings. So we tend to think, we will associate a feeling in our tummy that we feel, or your heart rate, or however it happens to you, and think, oh God, that's it, I'm nervous, the nerves are here, it's all going to go terribly wrong. But if you think to a time when you were really happy, but had these same feelings, then we tell ourselves we're excited, but we manage to put a negative thought to it and put it in one situation and think, oh, this must mean it's bad, instead of being able to feel these feelings and recognize them and think, actually, these feelings mean that I'm ready. These feelings mean a positive thing. This excitement, this nerves and adrenaline, this tells me I'm switched on and I'm ready to perform. So that becomes a comfort.
I had quite a cool thought that I reckon that the level of butterflies or anxiety beforehand is directly proportionate to the high afterwards if it goes well.
Absolutely.
And so when you really feel it, you're like, okay, this is going to feel great when I nail it.
Yeah.
Which, you know, sometimes did actually really work. And otherwise your butterflies were there for a reason telling you shouldn't have gone anyway. But on the days that it did go well, the rush makes it all worth it.
Yeah. And it should be exciting. You know, if you're standing generally beside the ring or going at whatever it is and feeling nothing, that's not normal. And I think we've all got so conditioned to think that we need to be completely in control all the time and calm all the time and confident all the time. And sometimes, you know, we're human beings. We're meant to feel different emotions. We're meant to feel excited. We're meant to feel nervous, but they're not bad things. We can channel that to performance, to fun, to energy.
And most of the pros, however calm they look, are feeling the same feeling. Tom McEwen, I think, is the only one who really genuinely had to be. He said at the Olympics, just before he got on for cross country, someone's got to wake me up somehow because I'm just not feeling cruising around. Maybe that's, you know, his protective instinct. But most riders, however in control and on top of everything and organized and calm and ready they look, are still dealing somehow with demons.
Of course. I know an Olympic rider who every single important show still vomits in the lorry. But that's almost become, it's not a great ideal strategy, but that's become part of their thing. You know, they're so nervous and so excited and so that they literally can't contain it. They're like, okay, you know, no one's immune to it. And it's a shame. And I think that's why these sorts of things are so good to hear people. And I wish you know, top level riders like yourself would be more open about feeling that way because it normalizes it. You know, whereas everybody thinks it's just something that happens to them, whereas in truth, it's something that happens to most of us, but it doesn't mean it's a bad thing.
Can I bring Charlie in here as well? So Charlie, you obviously compete and you coach. What's your sort of experience of working with less experienced riders, shall we say, and how, you know, do you go to the shows with them, or how do you prepare if they're stepping up a level for that sort of extra pressure of a new level of competition, for example?
I was actually just quite enjoying listening to my wife. I mean, we're in separate places.
Sorry.
So she's actually quite good at this. So it's very rare that I actually get to listen to her work. So this is new for me. Yeah, I think I'm just thinking from the more where can I chip in is from the coaching point of view. I mean, I work with a range of riders, and I think the theme that's coming out is that it doesn't matter what level you are, we're all dealing with the same stuff. It's just that the demands of the sport and the level that you're at require different things. So from a more elite point of view, the one of the biggest issues that we have actually with our top level riders is a lack of show support. Surprising or not, you know, in other sports, your coach is your main go-to person that you spend 99% of the time with, and it would be very rare that they would perform a movement without their coach in front of them, you know, guiding them and supporting them. Whereas in equestrian, we have to do most things on our own, and we get our, you know, our practitioners in and our team in and our coach in, but it's not a regular occurrence, and that's more a financial thing. So the same is said for show support. So unless you're on a team and you're in a Nations Cup, you know, or a team environment, you have to pay your coach to come out, and they charge a day rate, and so that all adds up. So there are other ways that you can do that now. Like we're using Zoom now, and so lots of riders I coach at shows I'll do online, and there's also other elements to that, because I find as a coach, you have to be very clear with what you're delivering. When you're working with the rider and the horse, in that moment, your role is very technical. You're trying to help improve the horse and the rider, and you're trying to give the rider tools and a different perspective to unlock the horse's potential and improve performance, basically. But also your role as a coach needs to be there's so much ground to cover conversations like how you prepare for your dressage test, for actually you have your team in place, but are they performing with the way that you want them to perform? Or could there be areas for improvement? Could there be areas for development in terms of your horse's strength and conditioning and things like that? Could we check and challenge, for example, I think is a role of a coach to actually think, okay, we're doing a good job, but could we do this better? And so that's where you find that we use now, you know, like online platforms to actually do it a separate space. I tend to find that with my riders, we tend to do the ridden work, you know, on a coaching day and so on. But then we would do a performance assessment on a separate occasion, like online, and being able to differentiate the two. I wrote down team was one of the biggest things that came out of Lucy's presentation, along with loads of other really great insights. But the other thought I had was process equals outcome, and getting your process right, and actually having that depth of process, I think, is what a lot of top riders are able to do, because the lifestyle has facilitated them to be able to spend the time to do that. And your riders that have less horses are still more than capable of achieving that. You don't have to have a yard full of 20 horses to do that. But what Sandie said was about strategy. You need to have strategies in place to be able to compensate for not riding 20 horses a day. So that's where the mindset is so important to be able to, and I visualize a lot as well. I trot around on my 5-year-old dreaming that one day this is going to win a medal. Whether that actually ever happens or not is not true yet, but that's my way
visualizing it.
of
I hope
almost
for that too.
let's hope so. Bring it into fruition. And then the other thought I had, kind of from a coach, I'm just going off on all different tangents here, if you don't mind, but I just thought that from a perspective of an individual, I think as a coach, we tend to see, going back to, we don't see people very often. I think it's always really important to take into consideration past, present, and future. So what has happened and what has been is really, really valuable and should never be underestimated. And I spend a lot of my time with riders having a conversation before we actually do any real, technical stuff in the middle of the session, because I think it's really, really important for the rider to feel that you are invested and you do care. But there are a lot of coaches and different generations, you find there are different themes and different trends. But in the old days, you used to show up, do as you're told. Okay, great, that's it. And then off you go again. Whereas now coaching's evolved to be much more 360 and much more supportive. So you've got to, I think as a coach, you've got to understand the horse's strengths and limitations, the rider's strengths and limitations, if there's been attack failure and why that's happened, and help the rider to understand the depths that are going on behind the scenes, which are as important. So when you're doing your coaching session and you're dealing with what's actually happening in the moment, you can add the most value possible because you have the full picture of what's going on, not just a slice of the pie and then you don't see the rest of it, which is actually more impactful. And then you also have to take into consideration where the rider would like to go. And you do, and I always say, when I was younger and hugely ambitious, I used to tell everybody, oh, you'll get there, and you'll be able to achieve your dreams. Actually, I found that I was putting my perception of competitiveness onto people that actually just wanted me to train them and to help them improve and to be better. And so I now say that it doesn't matter whether you want to win a gold medal, whether you want to win a red rosette, or even whether you're not competitive at all. If you're the type of rider that just wants to build their relationship with their horse, and that's your goal and that's your passion, and like Sandie said, that's your why, then that is more valuable than pushing somebody to be outside of their comfort zone that they don't want to do, and then you'll never see them again. And you won't be part of that journey and part of that partnership really between the horse and the rider. And I think that that's, for me, the most valuable thing as a coach, is getting to know the journey, between the horse, between the rider, or multiple horses, depending on who you're coaching, and actually seeing progression. I think that from my role, seeing the progression, whether it's somebody that has just started riding out, which I don't see very rarely, I'd probably suggest they go to someone else actually that's more capable of giving them the suitable tools now, because I'm not the safest person. I'd be like, oh, you'll be fine, come on, take your stirrups away. And but the progression of someone being that 1% better, and me being part of that journey, and it enabling somebody to perform better, I think as a coach, that is where I see my value in, is empowering somebody to be a better version of themselves, which all ties into what Lucy said, what Sandie said, and I hope I've made some sense too.
I was going to ask you all actually, in terms of the combination, the right, do you find you have clients where the horse is just not the right horse? It's the horse that's not suited to the rider, and you're never going to have a confident combination because they're just not gelling. And have you had experience of that yourself? And how do you tackle that with a client if you're going to recommend them to sell it or move on or something?
Yeah, I can answer that, and then guys, you chip in if you want to. But I've actually had just the last couple of weeks a few conversations with clients about the unsuitability of their horse for their goals. It would probably have been something that me, being a younger version of myself, I wouldn't have had the tools to be able to communicate that. but it's you learn that actually it's better to say something and to start the conversation, and then see where it goes and get a touch on how they're feeling about the situation. Because what I found, and Sandie and I, we've had these conversations, is actually they're already feeling that. It's just that maybe they're not sure about how to say it to you, and that they don't want to admit defeat, I find is quite often the common theme. And then all of a sudden, when you have that conversation, actually a weight's being lifted off their shoulders, and they go, do you know what? I actually knew in my heart that was the right thing. And I'm so glad you've said that, because I've been thinking it might be better. The horse might be suitable for somebody else. And that's okay.
Lucy, if you had because I was wondering as well, if it's in like an elite level where you've got owners and owners bought a horse to you or for you or something like that, how on earth do you deal with the pressure of thinking this horse isn't right for me, or I'm not right for it, or whatever way round? And you don't want to turn a ride away, but
broadly speaking, in eventing, there's a huge safety aspect to that. So I'd find it much easier to say to an owner that I didn't think it was the horse for me, but that I could think of several other people that might be interested in taking on the ride. Because when you're starting, you would ride whatever, your bum's on seats, it doesn't really matter as long as you've got your stables full. And then the older you get, I don't know whether it's wiser, but you get, I think for me it was quite hard. I'm 6'1" and quite strong anyway, so I was never really able to say, but it might suit a bloke better, or easily I could be too big for it. That was an easy way out. Or but then I guess what I would find harder, I'm less experienced in the coaching than you guys, but I have a couple of times said to people, what's your goal for today? What would success look like if you left this lesson and you could do tick a box or X, Y, or Z? What would it be? And then halfway through the lesson, you think we are nowhere near. How's this going for you? Are you enjoying it? Do you enjoy riding this horse? And there was one girl who I just said, if I had one ride a day, this wouldn't be it. And try to make it, all about that, you're talking about the holistic approach. I used to work as a physio, and you're not supposed to treat a knee. You're supposed to find out about all the aspects that make this knee painful. So similarly, I guess you could apply that to teaching and just think, this is supposed to be your fun. You're spending an awful lot of money on it, a hobby. And you're making so many sacrifices to get there. You really want that to be the juice to be worth the squeeze. And if it isn't, I think I've approached it sometimes that way. Safety first, because I wouldn't hesitate to say, if someone's going to go and have a really nasty fall and I haven't said anything, then I'm really deeply unprofessional and actually not very nice either. So that's a really easy in. Yeah. But otherwise it's like, is this ticking your boxes? Is this fun for you?
And Sandie, how would you approach it if people were thinking it was a sign of a failure because they couldn't get on with the horse? What would you approach there?
Yeah, this question makes me chuckle, because 10 years ago when I burst onto the scene doing what I do and no one else was really doing it, I had a client who came to me hating on herself, thinking she was useless, pretty much she bought a horse, and it was a black horse, and it was a well-bred horse, and it was everything that should be her dreams, and it was a horrible horse. I mean, a horrible horse. Bitter, it colicked frequently. She got to the point where she stopped hacking. She was too scared to ride out with it. Her confidence was crashing. She hated going to I mean, she was at the point where she felt physically sick. And I would say, after 3 months of building her confidence in this, I was like, do you want this horse? And she looked horrified that I would even question her loyalty to the most beautiful black horse that she'd saved up for 10 years to buy. Quite tragic. It's like, would you date him? Like, ultimately, would you date somebody that treated you like that? She's like, God, no. And she was a policewoman. She's like, God, no. And I was like, you have to think about what you're getting from this relationship. And the bit people hate to hear here is, if you're feeling that way about your horse, you're not doing the best thing for them either. A horse behaving that way isn't happy with an owner that feels that way, or someone who's not confident or competent around them. So I boldly told her that I thought she should sell the horse. And the yard owner, her physio, and her Reiki support people all phoned me and said, how dare I tell her that she should give up on this animal, and a horse is for life. And I have a Shetland I've had for 24 years. If I could keep a horse forever, I will keep them forever. But sometimes, I mean, there's millions of horses and millions of people. So when the stars align and it comes together, that's an amazing thing, but it's not a given. You know, and I think that's something that the equestrian business needs to get better at, that it's not a failure. It's actually a sign of confidence to be able to say, you know what, this is not the horse for me, or I'm not the rider for this horse. And of course, find that its next safe passage. I equally think there's a really disappointing trend in our instant society that people buy horses and perhaps aren't the rider they need to be for them. And the minute it goes wrong, sells them. You know, and that's not what I'm condoning. You know, I think the minute a horse stops at a fence, they'll sell it and buy another, you know, rather than learning to ride it, which is the way it would always have been before. So I think there's two sides to that. But yeah, there's absolutely no shame in, if it's not just a compatibility and something you can train through, there's absolutely no shame in.
It's like people, isn't it? There are people that someone's best friend and you think, I wouldn't spend 2 minutes with you given the choice. And so that again is like, as you get more grown up, hopefully you can do that politely and just step away from spending time with that person that drives you nuts.
Yeah, and that horse went on to be super with someone else, and she is now achieving all her hopes and dreams with a lovely chestnut mare, you know, and now you know, it's
I had a question for Charlie. With your sort of international coaching and things, do you find different cultures and sort of trends or around the world that people approach all of this sort of very differently, different cultures? Any thoughts on that? I'm putting you on the spot a bit. I was just curious.
No, that's okay. It's interesting. Definitely yes. And I think, you know, for anybody that's traveled, been on holiday, you see different cultures just based on where you go and the types of people that you meet. But I think the one common theme that's always, I find really lovely, is that everyone wants the best for their horse. And so the one common denominator is wanting to improve and develop and wanting to build a better partnership with your horse. So that never changes, no matter where you go. There can be language barriers sometimes. So particularly going to Asia, quite often you'll have a communicator or a translator, sorry. So sometimes there can be a timing issue of when you're trying to relay something very specific in that moment, and then you have to wait another couple of moments for that message to pass on. So you learn a lot about yourself in your communication style, and then a little bit like what matters and what doesn't matter, because actually you have to second guess yourself and go, that doesn't matter, don't say that. That does matter, that's really important, say that bit, because you're almost filtering out some of the nonsense. Because, well, let's face it, as a coach, sometimes there is some nonsense that you question yourself after the session and say, actually, perhaps maybe I could have cut that down, or maybe be more precise or something like that. Everyone's very welcoming, and you know, particularly when I go to America, that they're very hospitable. So you find different types, but I think people are people, and I think that what I tend to really consider is what motivates people. You know, when you can get to the core of people's why, people's incentives as to why they get up at 5 in the morning. And I sometimes question especially when I'm in America, and I think, God, these people have driven 10 hours for 3 days to come and have a lesson for, you know, 3 or 4 times through the week, and then go home again. That's a lot of time, commitment, money, resources that they have dedicated. So I better be on my A game. And when I'm feeling like I've got jet lag at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and all I'm wanting to do is be in bed, I just need to suck it up and actually give them the best lesson that they've had. And but yeah, I wouldn't say there's a huge difference, but the horse sport is an amazing community, and when it goes well, it goes really well. But there can be some hard times too with horses, as we all know.
Which probably leads nicely on to my last question, which was really around sort of social media and what, you know, obviously there's some high profile cases and things which I think the general consensus is often snapshots taken out of context and probably grossly unfair. But how would you, in the modern world, sort of coach people and help people to sort of deal with some of that?
Sandie?
Any experience of it, or any thoughts, or is that just a whole topic in itself?
No, I use Sandie. Sandie's my go-to here. I'm very fortunate that when I do come home, I quite often, and I'm guilty for this, is I hand my phone to my wife. Please help me with this problem. I normally tend to pass the burden on to someone else that has better tools and is more equipped to deal with them than me.
Which actually is a really important point in itself, isn't it, in terms of riders and how to handle it. So go on, Sandie, what do you do to help Charlie?
So I think in general, personally, I've been very lucky, and I think unfortunately now I do most of Charlie's social media. So if it's wrong, then it's hands up to me. But unfortunately now you need to be so ridiculously careful. And I think there's sort of two camps you fall into. You can think, well, this is it, this is real, this is me, and I'm going to chuck it out there anyway, and people can say what they want. But I think you kind of have to be respectful of the fact that if we are putting information out there, then we are inviting people to have an opinion on it. So you can't really be offended if somebody gives their opinion. And unfortunately, most of the opinions that you get in the wrong situation are not people that that are knowledgeable on a specific moment in time or a specific topic. But it's not easy to stay rational about that when you're the target. But I think for riders, something that works for me or with most of my clients, I'm like, if somebody's telling you something, would you let them ride your horse? And if the answer is no, then is it a comment that you need to take on board? No. If somebody posts something that's rude or offensive on your page, should you get involved with it? No, just hide it or block it or delete it. But I mean, it's hard. I've had riders come to me, with horrific abuse, people telling them they should kill themselves because their horse ran out at a fence, people telling them, size 10 riders, that they're obese and that they should, go diet camp. I've had people been told they should have facelifts. Horrific abuse. It is a horrible place, but it's also, I built my business on there and met some of the most amazing clients and beautiful people in the world. So I think majority of it is positive. I think, unfortunately, we all need to open our eyes and be honest and hold ourselves accountable that, we're making sure that we can always do the best that we can do for our horses. And, I don't think that quest should ever stop. But I think, put what you're happy for people to see. That doesn't mean edit it to death, but it's for some, I guess it depends whether social media is a personal journey for you, where you like to put things out and converse and it matters a lot to you, the feedback you get, or for myself, it's a business tool. So it's used in a certain way. And I think for most riders, professional riders, when you get used to it being a brand, then you're much clearer on what you represent. But I think the thing to remember with social media is it's not real.
Yes.
It's really not real. And the things that people say on it would never, we've allowed this platform. In reality, everybody talks about someone. We're not all meant to get on, we're not all meant to be friends, but for the most part, you would never, ever, ever want someone to hear what you said about them. And we've sort of lost that bit in society now because it's all public. What somebody says in a minute, normally you would never say it to someone's face, nor would they say it to yours, but for some reason people think on social media it's acceptable.
Yeah.
Line I heard the other day, which similar to what Sandie's saying, is like with regards to social media, or even just generally, like when you're scrolling through TikTok or whatever, it's you can either be a creator or you can be a consumer, but you have the choice to work out which one you want to be.
That's a very good way of looking at it. I've got one question about if you do have bad experiences, whether it's a fall or even sort of a negative comment on social media, are there any tools for sort of letting go of those negative thoughts and not hanging on to them that you can share to help people just move on from it, I guess?
I think again, it's for me, it's the reality check. Yeah, I've had some pretty grim injuries, but in the dust yourself off and get back on mode, you know, like Sandie was saying, you know, hop straight back on, you automatically start planning your rehab and how quickly you can beat whatever the doctor told you. I did ring a really good mate from an ambulance once and said, guess what, I can come to your wedding now, because I dislocated my shoulder, and I'd had to say no because I was supposed to be going to a 3-day event, and so trying to think, right, well, I've got this downtime, I'm going to try and tick all the other boxes in my life that I neglect, housework or
silver lining.
social bits. And then in terms of rehabbing yourself, just go back through your process, and sometimes it takes ages and sometimes you can do it more quickly, but you know, for eventers, you know, can I start walking again, can I swim again, then, you know, can I get on a ride with no stirrups because that was a broken ankle at that time, and then can I start having some dressage lessons, and just put your pieces back together, and you can disguise it as being for the horse's benefit that you need to take that long. Just wear it on the chin, you know, I'm going to get ready as soon as I can. I'll do maths homework in a minute. I've got maths homework on my left. So that's how, personally speaking, is how I manage it. And then have had enough practice runs. So say you've had a fall at a tricana or you've had a fall at a coffin. If that comes into your head when you look at a jump, that is where your tumble happened, which I don't think I've ever experienced too badly. You practice enough of them at a little level, it doesn't come into your head until you think, well, here I am doing them again. So I think it's quite a sort of structured and again repetitive, and again, like Sandie was saying about the strategy, you know, even if you have to unpick it again a bit to get back to where you were, there was a system that got you there in the first place, so get back on that horse and get back to where you want to be. And deal with each of the bumps as they happen.
Okay, we've had another question come in. If you've got a horse who's less keen on the limelight and gets sort of overawed at shows and events, what would you do to help them get over that, especially as it often becomes something you as a rider think about too much, which probably makes it all worse? Any thoughts? And Charlie, maybe what would you do?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because every horse behaves in a slightly different way. But you do get a generic type of an anxious horse, or one that, you know, you've always got to consider, well, why is he behaving like that? You know, is he comfortable in himself? Is it just related to the limelight? And if it is, okay, then is that you putting your impression by the sounds of that question? That could be a factor to take into consideration. But that aside, I mean, there's lots of things you can do. Like I really liked Lucy's slide on demeanor. You know, I think we know as humans, our body language is the biggest slice of how we communicate. And I think that has such a big impression on our horse. So remaining calm, I talk about the low heart rate a lot, actually, and just being able to be in that state of giving the horse clear information, because you can't be clear with your communication if your heart rate's high, and nor can they be learning in a positive way if their heart rate's high. Whether you're doing dressage or jumping, it's the same thing. They're just different skills, but it's the same. You're trying to create positive movement patterns, positive learning experiences. So it's a little bit the same as if you've had a bump in the road. You know, you're going back to your processes and you're trying to build it up, but you're also trying to gradually expose the horse in various ways. So you've really got to understand what it is about that environment that is the scary thing for the horse. So a horse can be spooky, but is it sight orientated? Is it sound orientated? We've spoken about senses. You know, we have horses that are very noise orientated, and then others that see everything. And you're thinking, how did you spot that was in the other field over there? And, you know, it's all those factors. So I think for me, the most important thing is get to know your horse and actually try and break that down so that you can go a bit deeper maybe than you think is possible, and really work out its behavior, and then put strategies in place around that to try and help the horse understand that actually it's not as scary as how you see that environment, because they see it differently to us.
And would you say with the strategies, like do you go back down the levels or to a quieter show or a arena hire, or like, can you build that into how do you?
So I'll give you an example. This morning, I was riding really early this morning and the environment changed. So I was riding indoors, the lights were on there to set the scene. There are flags all the way down one long side. And normally when the door is closed, the flags don't move. And today the door was open and the flags would move randomly according to the gust of wind. And I was on a young horse and initially had seen it, the head went straight up and he went, I'm not going that way. And I said, come on, you're fine. And he went, no, I'm really not going that way. So I then changed strategies and went, right, let's try distraction. So let's try perhaps a shoulder in or something. This is just in walk, just to try to give the horse something else to think about. That didn't work. And then at one point I said, maybe you're just being a bit of a wuss, come on. And he went, no, I'm definitely not. And at that point I felt his breathing change and his heart rate change. So I went, right, change tactics. And this is where you have to be, he's put in one of your slides, adaptability. You have to adjust in the moment according to what's happening. So I went, right, I'm not going to, and I actually said to myself, I'm not going to let my ego get in the way. And I'm not going to go, you must go in this direction. I'm going to say, I've got limited amount of time. It's 5 o'clock in the morning. I want this to be a productive session. Let's go down this end. Let's work on whatever I wanted to work on. And then I changed tactics. I went, let's go on the 3/4 line and let's make this productive learning and positive for you. And then by the end of the session, he went down the end of the arena because I wasn't distracted in my mind with the problem. Instead, I was focused on the learning outcomes. What am I here in this arena to do? I'm here in the arena to educate the horse and to give the horse, to be 1% better than what he was yesterday. And that was, so I've refocused and reframed my mindset in that moment. And I had to do that 4 times according to the situation changing each time.
I think that's where relationships are so important as well, isn't it? Like actually taking the time to build a relationship with your horse, whether it's grit work, which I think is hugely underestimated, so that that you can be the person to give your horse confidence in that time. You're the person that if you say, it's okay, we've got this, they're like, oh, it's okay. And that you're not sat there being like, oh, it's okay, we've got this. And they're like, holy God, what's happening up there? It's having that solid trust is something, that does make a big difference, doesn't it? Especially producing youngsters, or when we can't ask someone to be confident if we're not asking them confidently.
Yeah.
I always think with youngsters that we are like, everything is new to them. And so it is our job as riders, as coaches, we are giving them new experiences every day. So it's, if a horse has maybe made a mistake, it's up to us first. It's on us to figure out the why and then to help support them to, if they've messed up on a fence, was that me first before was that the horse? It's if they lost balance in a downward transition, was I in balance? And actually, did I help them, or did I make a mistake, or did I over ask? Because we're always, as riders, you're always trying to weigh up in your head, and we're riding in our heads the whole time, and you're always trying to go, should I ask for more? Should I ask for less? And you're just trying to weigh up these two sides of a coin, going, is ready for a little bit more. And that means that you have to know yourself and your own personality to work out, I'm the type of person that goes, I'll give it a go. And I have to check myself and go, is he ready to do that yet? And so that we've talked about knowing your horse, but you also have to know yourself as a rider. Some riders need a bit of a nudge to say, he was ready 10 days ago and you've not capitalized on that window. Go for it.
Yeah, and I'm just going to chip in a little bit on the nutrition side. I think we're really starting to understand much more about the sort of gut-brain axis and just how diet impacts on gut and how that impacts on behaviour. And there's been some good studies done. Louise Bulmer, a researcher based in Scotland, looked with naive ponies as well as school horses. So yes, not elite competition horses, but trying to reduce the variables in terms of familiarity and handling, and showed that horses on higher starch rations are much more reactive to novel stimuli. They've got higher resting heart rates and they are more reactive to new things. So looking at your diet as well is worth, even if you sort of dial it down for a bit, or even pre a competition, just to see if you can have an impact there. And obviously there's sort of short-term but also long-term effects as well, so well worth reviewing that. I think Tracy's going to put a link in the chat box to some of that research, because it's very interesting. Right, I think if it's okay with you guys, you can have a break, do the maths homework, Lucy. I'm gonna just take the floor for a little bit with some nutrition things, so feel free to turn your cameras off or have a drink or whatever, and then I'll only be sort of 20 minutes or so, hopefully. So I'll just share my screen, make sure I get the right one. Okay, so hopefully everyone's seeing the full screen, because I've got a dual screen and it always messes up the presentation. But I thought I'd just touch on that really in a bit more detail in terms of the relationship between energy, diet, and perhaps what we can do as feeding strategies to try and help have perhaps a calm horse, and therefore build our confidence. And as a sort of very succinct overview of what we're going to look at, I thought just review where energy comes from, because again, the whole carbohydrates versus oils can cause some confusion. We have some new work from the researchers at the Lab to Field research group based in Dijon in France that is really interesting in terms of supporting elite level performance horses with fibre-based diets and the impacts that has on metabolism. So we'll just explore that in a bit more detail. And sorry if you're eating your tea, but I'm just going to comment on mucus. It's my favourite subject at the moment, but very much in the context of gut health and why it matters. So in terms of energy, the two real sort of main energy sources that we're thinking about in the horse are the sort of carbohydrates and the oil, and we'll just touch on some of the key points really in relation to those. So where is energy coming from when we think of carbohydrates? Well, we have the non-structural, so you'll see that listed as NSC, or referred to as NSC, which is effectively starch and sugar. And that's the energy that's broken down by the enzymes to simple sugars in the form of glucose. And that's why we talk about a glycemic response in relation to these sorts of materials when we use them. The horse can actually use them as an energy source straight away, or he can store them as glycogen and then ultimately fat if his glycogen stores are full. So that's the kind of energy source that we tend to reduce if we're worried about things like laminitis or ulcers or overexcitable behaviour, because it is that quick release energy that's available pretty readily to the horse. We also then have the structural carbohydrates, which we more typically refer to as fibre, and that's actually generated by your fermentation by the microbes, and that creates volatile fatty acids. So you might see them referred to as VFAs. This would be your slow release energy source, so it takes a lot longer for that fibre to be broken down by the microbes. Again, it can be used directly as an energy source at low work intensities, typically, and then we would also see that potentially stored as fat as well if you're feeding more than the animal actually needs for the energy requirements for the maintenance and work that it's doing. So that's a sort of carbohydrates, so structural and non-structural. And when we look at things like forages, they actually have both the NSC and the structural carbohydrate in the form of fibre. And it often surprises people just how much of the simple sugars, the sort of non-structural carbohydrates that a forage can contain. So if we think about 10 kilos of hay, which is, you know, round, very round number, sort of 2% of a 500 kilo horse's sort of body weight is going to give you roughly 10 kilos of hay, keeping the numbers as simple as we can. That's actually going to give 1 kilo, a whole kilo of simple sugar, and that doesn't include your storage sugars, because in an average hay we've probably got about 10% simple sugar. We can have quite commonly 20% water-soluble carbohydrates in forages. So that's your storage sugars as well as the simple sugars. So for every kilo of that forage, your horse is actually getting 200 grams of sugar. As I mentioned, this is sort of quick release or instant release energy that a horse can use it straight away. So even though you're feeding forage, you've still got that supply of a quick release energy source, albeit that it is relatively slowly consumed. So that's the difference between something like this and an energy dense cereal based feed, where the animal is consuming a lot in a relatively small space of time or short space of time. Just because forage, eating 10 kilos of hay is going to take longer, you have that slightly less sort of instant release of the energy into the horse, albeit that it is in the form of a simple sugar. What do we know about the level of energy we're getting from sugar? Well, 16 megajoules in a kilo of sugar, and that is basically equating to around about 20% of a 500 kilo horse's maintenance needs, if we think that they need roughly 75 megajoules per day. So overall, hay can make a significant contribution if you then start to add in the energy coming from the fibre as well. And if some horses or most horses are getting some access to grass throughout the year, then very quickly you can see that the combination of grass and haylage is going to meet their basic energy requirement. And that's really the sort of, I think, the shift, or leading to the shift, along with the sort of risks associated with high starch intakes, that's contributing to the fact that even what we would call sort of mixes and cubes, so the muesli mixes and sort of what would have been historically cereal-based feeds, are actually increasing in fibre and generally reducing in their starch content. So the lowest one I think I've found that is readily available would be around about an 8% starch content. The ingredient list is there, so you can see where that starch is probably coming from in the form of the pea flakes and the soya flakes. But the ingredients listed in green are actually pretty much just fibre sources that you can use yourself if you were making up a ration using straights in a much more traditional way. So things like shoe meat pulp and grass pellets are readily available. So really all these mixes and cubes are doing is putting the vitamin and minerals in a premix, rather than you just adding a balancer or a supplement to those high fibre feeds. Now the lowest one I can find is 8%. That's still about 4 times higher than a pure alfalfa and oil sort of feed would have for a similar energy value. And many of these products describe themselves as low starch, but they are still even as high as 15 to 18%. So do check the product that you're going to use. Where these sorts of products can come into play is that they are energy dense relative to chopped fibres or forages. So again, if you've got a horse with a limited appetite, or you really need to get more energy into them, they can be useful in that context, because the horse hasn't actually got to eat so much volume. So it's interesting how the market is evolving, or the products available to us are evolving. And again, it all comes on the back of some of these recent studies that are really showing and demonstrating that we can utilise fibre to fuel these elite performance horses. Now, interestingly, this published paper last year was by the Lab to Field research group in France, and they were, I suppose, looking back in their sort of introductory part of the paper to the fact that we have actually known about the benefits of sort of fibre-based diets for quite some time. So, you know, the researchers are highlighting some of the work dating right back to the 1980s that, you know, is demonstrating if we give horses enough fibre, they will produce enough energy if it's there to actually fuel their performance. So again, more recent work by Janssen and Lindberg, if it's there, the horse will use it. And it's that kind of demonstration of making sure that you've got the high quality fibre, the levels that are actually going to be sufficient to allow these horses to utilise it as an energy source. The traditional sort of approach to feeding these elite, especially in racing, racehorses, is to use a much higher level of starch and a much lower level of fibre or forage in the ration. Well, obviously, you know, the raw materials are not there to enable the horse to utilise the end products of fibre fermentation as an energy source. So the message here is if you put it in, they will use it. What is interesting about some of these studies is that they actually looked at one time point. So they would do what we'd call a standard exercise test on one day, rather than looking at the sort of long-term impacts of a sort of change or a different approach to feeding them. Now, the reason that 90% of VO2 max is sort of highlighted, or what they're aiming to push the horses to in these studies, is that that's the level where you get some changes to aerobic sort of metabolism and function. So that's where you can start to see the impact that the change of fibre, or sorry, the change of diet is actually going to have. So the exciting thing from my point of view about the recent study published last year is it was looking at the much longer term effect, so over 8 weeks rather than just an isolated time point on one particular day. And the diet actually was composed of grass hay. In both rations, it was the sort of majority of what was fed. And then alongside that, one ration, or one half of the group, was on a proportion of oats, and then the other group was on alfalfa with a smaller proportion of oats. So there was still some going in there, but a much, much lower level than would typically be fed. So the alfalfa that was used was a combination of chopped as well as pelleted alfalfa, and again, sort of about a 4-to-1 ratio of alfalfa to the oats. Now the diets were energy matched, so both groups were receiving the same amount of energy, but just because of the quality protein that you find in alfalfa, it meant that that group that had the alfalfa in it were just getting a little bit more protein than those. And this is what is, I suppose, challenging about trials in the real world, in the sense that you're using products that are on the market, and it's quite hard to sort of match every nutrient. So yes, it's a slight difference and discrepancy between the two, but the key was really focused on the energy and the amount of energy that was supplied. So the findings of the study were that all the horses ate their rations without any refusals, which is really encouraging in these fit racehorses. One of the challenges can be to get them to eat enough of something like chopped fibre, and no adverse effects were seen on the health of the horses at any point in the trial. Now, the increase in the muscle size, so they're increasing in their fitness and their strength through the normal work that they're doing, was no different between the groups. So we're not necessarily looking for a fibre diet to do a better job than a cereal-based or a starchy-based ration. We're just looking for there to be no compromise through doing it. And that was the case. You know, it didn't, just because we weren't putting high sort of cereal-based feeds in the ration, didn't compromise in terms of muscle development, and the horses were comparable. So they performed an exercise test on week 9, and what they found is that the oxygen consumption between the two groups did not differ, but actually the control diet group exhaled more CO2 than those in the high fibre group. And the authors say that, or suggest that this is due to the modification of the energy substrate used during exercise. So in other words, by having more fibre in the ration, there was a benefit metabolically to these horses, or a change. And they're suggesting that this actually is a good thing, because it was indicative of potentially delaying the onset of this sort of metabolic acidosis, which would ultimately result in fatigue. So that's really key to performance. So in other words, there was no difference in the sort of performance, the muscle tone. We're not looking for a fibre diet to necessarily be better. We just want to match what the status quo, or the normal sort of diet, would achieve. But actually what we might see, and it's too early from one study to make some conclusive comments, but there is an indication that it could potentially be actually beneficial for the performance of these horses if we start to look at things like when fatigue occurs. So this is really encouraging to show that these, over a prolonged period of time, or relatively prolonged period of time compared to normal trial data, we're seeing these really fundamental shifts. And why does that matter? And this is where the mucus comes in. Well, we're looking for ways of improving gut health and trying to reduce the risk of disease and problems whilst maintaining performance. And the 1 kilo of oats that was in that ration with the alfalfa is going to give you roughly 400 to 500 grams of starch, which is well below the recommendations for minimising risk of gastric ulcers. And previous work from the same research group had actually found that horses receiving more of the fibre in the rations, even those working at hard levels, So despite the same sort of levels of stress and issues, things that they might come up against through being elite performance horses, the fibre-based diets are actually showing that there's less microbial dysbiosis. So in other words, we've got a happier population of bugs in the gut, even with all the stress of travelling and competing or racing or whatever it might be. Those sort of microbes that live in the gut are pretty much, and it comes back to that resilience word again, able to withstand the rigours of exercise. And in those sorts of trials, they've used a combination of different ingredients, so things like unmelashed sugar beet as well as alfalfa. Why does that matter? Well, I've previously talked a lot about mucus and how important it is as a layer, a protective layer in the gut for trying to stop pathogens and harmful bacteria escaping from the gut and getting into the body. And we talk about it in terms of leaky gut syndrome. But more recently, we're actually aware that it's, and historically we've talked about the fact of too little fibre going in being one of the contributing factors that erodes mucus. But more recently, there's been work coming out from actually work in humans to show that if we get a dysbiosis of certain bacteria in the gut, those bacteria, some of them will actually be very efficient at utilising mucus as an energy source for themselves. So if you get a dysbiosis, that too many of the ones that basically eat up all the mucus and erode that mucus layer, what we're actually doing is again, making the gut more vulnerable to infection, and particularly with these horses that are travelling and competing, coming into contact with other animals, exposed to more pathogens. If we've compromised the health of the gut by eroding this mucus layer because of the dysbiosis, we're going to be more vulnerable to disease, digestive upsets, whatever it might be. So again, too little fibre is problematic in itself, but also then dysbiosis of the bacterial species present in the gut can have a really big impact on health, welfare, and obviously ultimately performance as well. So the other energy source alongside the sort of carbohydrates really is the oil, which we would tend to turn to rather than increasing the sort of sugar and starch in the diet if we possibly can. It's another source of slow release energy like the sort of fibre is, and the maximum level suggested, and I've highlighted total diet, so this means the whole ration, not just the bucket feed, is actually 10%. Now we rarely get anywhere near to that when we're looking at it as a total diet. So you'll see 10% in bags of feed, something like Afri-Oil, for example, would be 10% added oil. That's not, you're still well within the safe levels because you're using a relatively small proportion of it in the total ration. So if you start to get above 10% of the total diet, then you're going to have risks of impacts on gut health and obviously palatability as well. You can add straight oil. Linseed is a good source of omega-3, but not always the most stable ingredient. It is, because it's so good in omega-3, it is more vulnerable to oxidation. So that's why we tend to utilise, on the whole, especially when we're using higher levels in a feed, we're using rapeseed oil. It's a good practical balance between things like the nutritional value, sustainability criteria, stability, and cost as well. We often find that micronized linseed, so you can see the pictures there of the sort of meal, is often better accepted than straight oil by horses. So that can be a really practical way of getting some oil into the ration. And you can get sort of high oil supplements, or probably you could call them feeds as well. And just did a little comparison of some of the more popular ones on the market. So Bailey's do one called Outshine, Saracen's Equijewel, and compared and contrasted with the micronized linseed. So you can see some of the pros and cons. The thing, and the reason I like the micronized linseed, is that you're getting a really low starch content. And yes, we do have to be aware that the calcium phosphorus ratio is the wrong way around and there's no significant vitamin E in there. But if we add it with some, or feed it with some alpha, whichever product, Alpha-A, Afri-Oil, something like that, then rather neatly you can do 500 grams of each and you get the ideal calcium to phosphorus ratio, because alfalfa is so abundant in calcium. So that works really nicely as a ration, particularly if you're using a sort of performance balance or something alongside anyway. So just to round off, what would a high fibre ration for a performance horse look like? Well, These are some examples from obviously the Dengie range. I think the point I'd make about ad lib forage is do actually weigh what the horse is consuming. Because again, we're coming across a lot of people saying horse has ad lib hay or haylage and is stable, but you don't actually know how much they're consuming. So you have got to kind of weigh what you put in and weigh what you take out. You know, this is in the context of horses that suffer with things like gastric ulcers, because you can offer ad lib, but if they're not actually eating very much, or they have some reason why they wouldn't, like a diastema or something like that, you know, it's really important you understand just exactly what your horse is consuming. And then obviously analysis is really important to know what that forage contains, so we can start to, you know, build a balanced ration. And then you can build the rations up using things like the alfre oil if you really need the high energy but coming from slow release sources. If you have a horse that's reluctant to eat big volumes of chopped fibre, then alfalfa pellets, as you saw in the lab to field study, can be really useful. They're very concentrated in terms of scoops 1.6 kilos as opposed to about 300 or 400 grams of a chopped fibre. So you don't need very much volume to actually get the weight in. And then I would typically use things like up to half a kilo of your micronized linseed with a good quality performance balance or supplement, and then on top of that some electrolytes. So it doesn't need to be complicated. Obviously, if you need supplements, additional support for particular issues, and you can start to look around for things like joint support, but as the bare sort of bones, if you like, of a performance horse ration, the starting point, that's basically what it should look like. I've put out a question mark because at very elite levels, then yes, you can put some in for that sort of quick release energy source or the energy density if you need it. At lower levels of competition and work, then yes, it can be useful if you have a lazy horse, but to try and give them that little bit more quick release energy. But if you put it in and it has no effect, then take it out, because really the risks are, you know, if it's not having any benefit, there's no point putting it in there. And although low levels of starch are generally okay, it certainly starts to have an impact on things like gut health, fibre digestion, all of that. So if you don't need it, don't put them in there. So that was just to round off and give you some insight to some of the recent studies that have come out to really try and support the case for fibre-based rations, giving you that slow release energy, the focus for performance, especially if you have, like I think Emma has put in the questions there, that overawed animal that gets a bit excitable or spooky at shows, then let's dial it right down, or at least look at the diet and make sure A, it's balanced, but that we're putting the right types of energy in as the starting point. Obviously, thank you very much for listening. I'm going to stop sharing and bring the others back in if they're there, see if we've got any questions to round off, and just bear with me 2 seconds. Great. Has anyone had any other, I don't think there's any other questions, any other thoughts they want to share? Because there's always that minute where you get a chance to reflect and think, oh, I should have said. Go for it, Sandie.
You're on mute.
I know. So I just wanted to flip back to the moment of what happens when stress is overtaking us. In that moment, what can we do? And 2 techniques I learned in my role as a mind coach for some football clubs are it always sounds far more complicated than it is to put. So our brain can only make words if the nerve endings in our tongue move, even if we're not speaking. So in the same way people twitch horses, although we don't twitch horses anymore, this is a bit like twitching a horse. So if you put the tip of your tongue against the top of the back of your front teeth, it's a very simple exercise, just very hard to explain.
We're going to pull funny faces now trying to do it.
You can do it. So, and this is why it's such a good one. You can do it with your mouth closed. You can do it when you're riding. You can do it when you're smiling, when you're apt at it. But if you do that for, say, a minute or so and then release and do it again, that just really, really helps to quiet your mind. Just stops all the nonsense chatter. So I literally have a groove all my riders. You can see when the face gets very seriously, I'm like, oh, it's tongue time. So and it's just a really nice sedative effect. So it just stops the nonsense and it gives you something to focus on. So that's a really good one. The other one is not to do when you're riding, but it's okay if you're just standing, or if you can grab your rein without grabbing your horse's mouth, is by clenching your left fist. So you'll see a lot of football players doing this before they take a penalty shot. If we clench our left fist, that helps to disable the other part of our brain, which is nerves and anxiety and focus. So that's another one for really good just focusing. So that's two really easy quick win techniques. So taking a deep breath, tongue and fist.
I like those. I'm going to try the fist one. Lining up to punch them, but no. That's brilliant. Thank you. I've not come across either of those before. So one of the things
I'm just relaxing.
Yeah. I was really fascinated by the point, actually, Charlie, that you made earlier, because I went to watch National Cycling Champs, and we were right by the sort of start line, which was so interesting in the velodrome because it's very intense. But to your point, the coaches literally stood holding the rider up before they set off, because they're basically kind of wobbling and crashing if not, and they're kind of, you could see the interaction between the coach and the I don't know if some riders might not like that level of kind of literally seconds, they push you up and off you go, someone in your ear kind of asking or giving you advice or reassuring you or whatever. I don't know whether that would be a good thing or a bad thing.
I would ask at that point, I would ask so that was the national competition, was it?
Yeah, and they literally, because they come out and there's two of them riding against each other, and you could see them, and I don't think they were necessarily interfering, but you had that reassuring presence of literally someone holding you just before you're about to compete in your final. And I just thought such an interesting dynamic. And what would you say? I mean, it would have to be very personal, I guess, in terms of each rider would want something else different.
What you have to do is you have to know your sport, and you have to know your like what we discuss, especially with our championship riders. I'm now talking British teams, which probably shouldn't talk about, but that's okay. Is like we map with all of our riders. Firstly, we map the competition in terms of where there's space for conversation, who the riders want in that conversation, and what they want to have. What do they want in their ear? So, for example, like we all get on our horse and at a championship, it's in a block of stables. How long are the stables from your warm-up arena? Because sometimes the lorry park can be, and this is the same for events, the lorry park can be 10, 15, 20 minutes away sometimes from the stables. The stables can be another 10, 15, 20, sometimes half an hour away by the time you get there to the warm-up arena. And so what I'm saying is you break down all these elements of the competition, and every ride is different, and so you have the conversations. Who is important in your team? What is their role? What do you want them to do? What do you want them to not do? And you build basically a model around the rider and the horse. So you give them a very bespoke setup for their team. So you'll have riders that just before they want to go in, they want to hear something reassuring that says, go for it, you've got this. And you'll have other riders, and that comes back down to when I said I want to know the rider's motivation, what motivates them, because you have some riders that need extra motivate. Tom McEwen, I went to school with Tom. So it's funny you mentioned Tom, because I can vouch, he is so laid back. He won't mind me saying he needs a kick out the backside. So like, Tom, come on, wake up, man. And then there are other riders that you say that to someone and it pushes them overboard. So you're absolutely right. It's just about really kind of taking the sport apart and doing what you can to influence, and also then knowing the athlete as well and knowing what they want.
Yeah. And are you guys do you feel like equestrianism is learning from other sports? Is that kind of the relationship now, or are we professional and leading the way and things like that?
Yeah, definitely. I think that, we're very fortunate. We are right now in a generation, especially in dressage, and eventing as well, that is in a gold medal era. We are dominating our sport, and never before really has British equestrian been considered as a dominator of equestrian sport. So, you know, we're in a really, really privileged position now, but you're right. We've been really lucky with UK sport and with the insight into funding and other sports that we've been able to build basically an equestrian version of an elite, you know, gold medal winning pathway, really. And so in combination with other sports, but also knowing what's right for your sport, and it's all discipline specific as well, you know, because, you know, at my level, so I work with riders who are riding at junior, young rider, and under 25s, and they're, you know, some of them we've had multiple gold medals on the program, and some of them have been on the program, have then shot up to senior championship teams and have missed the stages in between. But those riders on the program, they get a very bespoke package that enables them to basically perform at their best. And that is that, you know, we've got the home team, like Lucy mentioned, but then we've also got the British equestrian team, which come in and add their element of data points and sports science and medicine and analysis that we've been really privileged to have in this modern generation of gold medal domination.
Well, it's a really nice position to be in, isn't it? I'm conscious of time, and I know, Sandie, you've been under the weather, so I'm extremely grateful for you sticking with us for a test of endurance, I think, probably. Any last comments or anything? I don't think there's any more questions.
I just had a quick question for you, Katie, reference your nutritional chat. And I hope I can get this right. On the study that they have been doing,
yes,
the objective measure was VO2 max.
That was to see whether you're pushing the horse to a point where you're going to get some metabolic change.
Yes, because what I'm thinking is that it's quite hard to objectively measure psychological improvement of them feeling better. And for us, that is like the biggest thing. If they feel good and happy and relaxed but energetic, and they've got that right balance, that's what's going to change our lives in our disciplines. I'm not saying for racing, but for eventing and dressage, particularly for us, the dressage phase, is we need them to have enough energy to run a marathon tomorrow, but not lose the plot today. So I don't know how you even begin to push studies in the direction of, and you know, where that even takes you, but it will be really interesting to know how you could improve their performance in terms of the percentage that they score in the dressage or something measurable like that.
From being calmer and more focused, I think. I think you know, that is really starting to come and looking at that sort of gut-brain axis. I mean, the trouble when you're measuring anything to do with microbiome is that there are so many variables, and it literally changes diurnally, so within the day in a particular horse, and take it somewhere and expose it to something else that just, you know, you kind of controlling for that in a real world scenario is extremely difficult, even in humans, and the whole sort of concept of things like probiotics, and even now fecal transfer from healthy people into people with chronic sort of gastrointestinal issues. You know, it works in some cases and it's not going to in others because of so many variables. But I suppose in a way our marker for health and comfort is probably something like gastric ulcers is a very obvious thing. You know, lots of ulcers are diagnosed secondary to a horse's change in its behaviour, and it doesn't want to go forward, or it's now starting to buck or misbehave when you're asking it to do more. So even if we can actually, if that's a very crude marker, but it's a very obvious one in the sense that you very quickly know if your horse has got ulcers, you know, and its change in behaviour. So these studies that I mentioned that Louise Bulmer did, and I think we put a link in the chat to it, was really interesting because it was just trying to take a physiological measure, so things like heart rate, and then a behavioural one, and marry the two up in relation to diet. And certainly the lower resting heart rates meant that they were less reactive. So all of those start to build a picture, although it is very, very difficult, as you say, to kind of measure comfort and happiness and whatever that might be. And and it's a really interesting point, because social license and welfare are increasingly coming up the agenda, and it's just been made law in Germany, for example, that every racehorse has to have turnout every single day for a period of time. I know it's certainly raised some eyebrows in the racing profession. Now, with your welfare hat on, that's potentially great news at top level. I mean, there's lots of nuance to it. If you've got entire colts, and how on earth do you do that? And in Newmarket, there are yards with no turnout, so it's going to have repercussions if it comes further afield. But anything that we can do to show we're actually putting more fibre in perhaps a more natural diet, even in a racehorse in elite training, it's going to help tick a sort of, I hate to say tick boxes, but it's really important benefits of welfare and behaviour and health and all those kind of things. So I think we're going in that direction, and the more evidence we can have to show it's the right way to, you're not compromising on performance necessarily, the more we're going to get trainers to view it positively and not something that has to be done. So,
very good, thank you.
Which might not be a quick question, but, and I know we're just short of time, but from a coaching point of view, I have quite a lot of riders that want to get the balance of behavioral issues, nutritional value, and I'd say something like add a balancer to what you're already doing, and the feedback will be, I don't want to add a balancer because it will make my horse more crazy. And so whereas I know from my point of view that it's more important that you're getting the nutritional content right, and the micros, macros, and all of that, and that's what the balance is doing. But so how do you advise people that do have a hot sensitive horse, but still give them their nutritional content that they need?
Yeah, I think it's going back to the basics, and we would start with the forage. So let's have a look at what's in there, because there is actually quite a lot of sugar in some of these forages, and let's understand how much we're doing, what it's consuming, and what it's getting from that. And then actually balancing the diet can be done with vitamin and mineral supplements. So you are literally putting minerals and vitamins in with pretty much no other starch, sugar, or energy at all. So at a very basic level, certainly for horse competing, sort of dressage and things, that might actually be sufficient, and we're not putting anything, like I was trying to sort of show with, and I'm not criticizing the mixes and the cubes, but even some of them that are marketed as low starch can actually be quite a lot higher than you really need. So yes, a balance is useful, supplements are useful, but just be wary of some of the products that claim to be low starch, because they might actually be higher than you think. I think the thing about balances, and actually this was a study that came out more in the context of good doers, is that you did actually get a glycemic and insulinemic response, because unless you bulk them out with some chopped fibre or some, maybe a mash or something, they are actually consumed quite quickly. And if you've already got a horse that's insulin dysregulated, such as something that's prone to laminitis or EMS, that can actually spike that reaction or that response. So, that we kind of want to slow the rate of intake by using these chopped fibres as much as we possibly can, and just dial everything right down, back to forage and fibre, just a vitamin and mineral supplement, and then if we need more, go from there. But there is sometimes there are, we get a lot of people where they've bought horses that are underweight, in poor condition, and have sort of been, should we say, sort of subclinical nutrition to help keep them calm. And then as soon as you start to feed them up, and they get fitter and stronger, and suddenly they're a different animal to ride. So I can see why some people are nervous, but I think it comes back to that right horse, right rider. If it's too much for you when it's actually in good health, then we probably need to find a different horse, because we shouldn't really be trying to calm him by not having a balanced ration. But it is very much the case that people will do that.
Oh, well, it's good to hear from the expert like yourself, because I know that, and that's what I try and promote. But it's, just sometimes you've got a doctor after your name, so that's always quite handy to hear.
Yeah, and it is very much, although we obviously work for feed companies and that, but nutritionists spend most of their time, or a lot of their time these days, talking about forage, because most of the time it's 90% of horses' rations. And if you don't get that bit right, whatever we put in the bucket actually is, you know, kind of a bit futile because it's such a small proportion of the ration. We need to go right back to the basics: what grass, what forage, because that's the thing that's ultimately going to make the biggest difference, particularly when it comes to weight and condition and energy supply. And that's the other one. If you've got the classic lazy horse, it's nearly always overweight and they just want to fizz it up rather than go on the diet and get them fitter and more forward going. But yeah, any questions on that, do get in touch, because there's we could do a whole webinar on that. Right, I'm going to call it because it's nearly 9 o'clock, and a big thank you to Sandie, Charlie and Lucy for your insights, sharing your experiences, and such an open and honest sort of information and sharing of knowledge. It's been really, really great. Everyone's positively glowing about the feedback I'm getting is so positive, so thank you very much for that. I'm sure the audience appreciate just how lucky we are to have speakers of this caliber, so there's lots of thank yous coming through. Thank you, audience, for joining us. We really appreciate you spending the time with us this evening, and as I said, the recording will be on the Dengie YouTube channel in the coming days. But with that, I wish everyone good night and thank you again. Take care and hopefully see you soon.
Very much.
Cheers, bye bye.